Okay, so secular Koranism, there was a little bit of interest last week, about 1,000 views. And I think people were intrigued to hear why would non-Muslims be interested in following the rules of Islam, even if they don't want to fully accept maybe Prophet Muhammad to be a prophet and details like that. So we got Claire here, who started this idea of secular Koranism. Could you tell me briefly, why would, in this age of liberalism, where people just want to be free to do anything they want, I think, why would you promote, imposing rules on people, on rules on their lives and things like that?
I think rules can protect us and regulate our behaviour towards each other, and I think most of us, even if we don't like rules, are used to the idea of the rules of our parents, the school rules, and even as motorists we have parking restrictions and speed limits, and though we complain when we get speeding tickets, parking fines, we sort of know that if there were no speed limits or parking restrictions, life would be pretty much intolerable.
Yeah.
So I guess we just want to have the medium, and what I think people disagree with each other about is this rule really necessary? I think that's always a source of contention.
Sure.
Because they think people will say, well, we don't think it's necessary to avoid idolatry, for example, or standards of sexual morality. It's like, okay, I've had sex with my pet, the sky hasn't fallen in, what's the problem? It's that sort of idea.
So that's interesting. So you've said one reason for having rules is it prevents chaos, it creates order, to the same thing. But I think if you have the right rules based on human nature, it will make you really happy. And like, for example, people say, what's wrong with having sex with your animal? And I think that's on the way. You might think that's strange, but people are already having sex with children. And a long time ago, homosexuality was considered really weird. I would consider it a downhill spiral, and it's an obvious kind of trajectory, right?
Yes, and in the Torah, it's actually a death penalty. Bestiality is a penalty of death. So, they did take it seriously when they took their religious principles seriously.
Sure. So let's go back to some things that people have accepted, like what's wrong with homosexuality, for example? People have that's become normalized. It was in the 1960s, I don't think it was. I think it was illegal, right, around then. So over the years it's become normalized, accepted, legalized even, and people think, what's the harm? Why does Islam have a whole bunch of rules? Is it just to make life difficult and miserable? And I would say no. According to the Quran, I'll give my quick answer. According to the Quran, God says, I only make things sinful that's harmful for you, and anything that's good for you, that's considered a blessing. So these are just like good, bad. If this is good, the definition of good is something that's actually good for you. Like, for example, the Quran says, get together every Friday. Oh, there's an obvious benefit for that, because there's a social benefit, And so you might say, what's wrong with homosexuality? Actually, we already know what's wrong with homosexuality. The NHS will tell you, for example, if you're trying to donate blood, they'll say, well, are you homosexual? If you tick that, there's a good chance your blood won't be accepted, because there are diseases associated particularly with homosexuality. There's also mental health problems strongly correlated with homosexuality. In fact, there's more chance of you being homosexual if you abused as a child. And does it make sense as at an evolutionary level to be homosexual? No, you essentially kill off the human race by not having children, which we already have. Like Elon Musk has said, that's the biggest danger facing society at the moment is population implosion. So homosexuality is just going to speed that up. So, it makes you miserable, it's unhealthy, bad for society in the long term. Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think we're talking about cause and effect. I was saying earlier, you could have indulge in extramarital sex, but you think, I got away with it, nothing bad happened, and this I think is really crucial in our ability to work out cause and effect. Because obviously, if you kill somebody, you see the consequences. That somebody has died. If you rob someone, you can see that they're obviously upset. And a lot of liberals like to think that it's a victimless crime. To consenting adults having sex with each other is not a problem. It's a victimless crime. But the knock-on effects of it, generations later, when you have an aging and shrinking society, and people just saying, well, I'd rather die than be forced to marry and be the parents of legitimate children. So they're basically saying, they're not going to do it. They're not prepared to do it, not even to save their civilization. Because the idea of being tied to one person and paying for the children is too horrible for them to even think about. And these attitudes will be, very difficult to shift once it's ingrained in society. And so far we've had half a century of worshipping the idol of sex and drugs and rock and roll. And they're not going to give it up easily.
Right, yes. Yes, so I like this idea that you're explaining here that, sorry, I'm trying to make it as close as possible, yet get the sound there as well. Anyway, so I like what you're trying to explain here is that people don't fully understand the long-term effects of their decisions, and God, who is wise, and we've seen through, let's call it try and error,
well, all ancient civilizations, they decline for the same reasons.
Right,
for
and
demographic
not
reasons.
all people are historians, so they aren't aware of this. Actually, most people are just too busy living their lives to be concerned about the long-term effects, or to study the long-term effects, or even study psychology or all this kind of stuff.
They don't even know their own history, let alone the history of other civilizations. So. And if you tell them, they'll just not really care.
Yeah, they'll fall asleep, right, yeah, exactly. So most people, it seems, are not capable even of making good decisions, long-term decisions for their own happiness. Like, for example, getting married seems difficult in the short term, but in the long term, after the struggle of having children, etc., raising them, at least you have somebody to take care of you in old age. There's a subtle beauty or enjoyment of having children, grandchildren, the relationship, all these kind of things are not popular at the moment. And I would say even homosexuality encourages people to not have proper man-woman relationship that has children. It's kind of like a short-term hedonistic approach to relationships, which is just like getting sexual pleasure. No growth, as it were. No growth.
I mean carbon cougar relationships are also, kind of designed to be sterile, for a much younger man.
Right. Yeah.
Having a much older girlfriend, just because he thinks he'll be safe from being pestered with, wanting him to marry her.
Right. Yeah. And of course,
problem.
Islam promotes marriage for one reason is to have children rather than have no children, right? So, so I can see there's all these different rules that religions generally promote. But why? And we can see religion. If you take the time to study it, you'll find that religious laws have stood the test of time. Much better than man-made laws that we try. We've tried this law of marriage doesn't matter, and now very quickly we're falling into population implosion. You know, all sorts of things. Like people try out homosexuality. In the 1980s, we had an AIDS epidemic, right? And we've managed to get it a little bit under control because people realised maybe they should use protection or something to reduce the damage. But there's endless things that we've thought, you know, religion doesn't know what it's talking about, and they try it, and then they have massive consequences all the time. So religious laws, they look, you know, simple and in some ways obvious and things, but when you try to test the opposite, you're in big trouble.
Yes, I mean, you could say that all the 5 world religions, you know, the ones that people have heard of, including Hinduism and Buddhism, is all about, you know, promoting marriage and family values. And
is Buddhism famous for that in the West? For marriage value? It's like it seems to be It seems to be that the highest level of behavior is to be a monk, which is to be celibate. And by the way, it doesn't work because people who know more about it, they know there's a lot of problems with paedophilia amongst Buddhist monks. Just for the same reason you've got the same problem you've got paedophilia problems with Christian priests.
Yes.
It's just unnatural not to have sex, not to be in a relationship, and so when people do this unnatural thing and they claim they're all perfect, like the Dalai Lama might want to claim, right? They have to kind of find secret alternatives, and there's this abused children who they think can't speak up for themselves. And for people who don't know, like the Dalai Lama was caught, I don't know how he didn't realise, or maybe it's kind of like a Freudian slip of type, you know, like his natural behaviour coming up when he tried to tell that poor kid to suck his tongue. Yeah, because maybe he's getting into his old age, and what he used to keep secret. Yeah, exactly. What he kept secret for a long time is coming out. And there's a lot of other dodgy things the Dalai Lama has been up to. He's effectively a CIA operative, isn't he? It's like he sold his country to the Chinese. He ran away to India while all the his Buddhist monks were slaughtered by Chinese or something like that.
I don't know, but I suppose his purpose is to complain about China running Tibet and saying he ought to run it. You know, that sort of thing. I don't know the details of it,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, Thailand is sort of, a good place for sex tourism. So maybe the women of the Far East might be grateful not to be, a Thai woman who's then pimp out their women in that way.
Okay.
So the Muslim countries, you don't get that sort of thing, and maybe if you lived in these Muslim countries, you might be grateful for that.
Yeah, so there's all these laws that when you put them to one side, everything goes out of control. Like in Thailand, what's the problem with one person's having sex with another person? What harm is it if you maybe use protection? But they don't know about the mental effect of having sex with strangers. And for people who don't know, there's a lot of mental effects, wouldn't you say? Mental harm, I would say, because sex is designed to create bonds, and if you don't nourish those, then I think some psychologists call it like you become essentially a psychopath, because you become detached and just abuse and use other people without feeling.
Yeah, I think people who have had high body count, as they put it these days, would find it difficult to bond with anyone and treat their relationships as disposable. And they'd always think there's always something better around the corner, so I could expect better next time and just keep moving on.
Yeah, so what was that? Is it oxytocin? I can't remember not oxytocin. There's a chemical, it's a bonding chemical, a hormone. So you lose that. If you have a high body count, you basically abuse or neglect the bonding feeling of sex, and you lose it after a while. Just like, kind of makes sense, right? If you don't use it, you lose it.
Or if you have lots of the same thing, you don't value it.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, if you've only had one sex partner, you'll sort of, remember that experience. But if you've had thousands, you're not, you won't value them because you've already had so many of them.
I like that point actually, because I thought you were trying to say the opposite. Like if you have sex with one person for your whole life, it's boring, but it's not true, because what happens is you develop a connection with them over time. It's very different, and that's kind of really big misunderstanding about that. So that's an interesting point. It's actually the opposite of what people think, isn't it? It's coming back to how religious laws are really wise, but we don't realize until we break them. So people go, oh, it's really boring, why would you have sex with... Like in Islam, you're limited to 4 people. I think Judaism, infinite, right?
Yeah, I think that there's some question mark about whether, Jewish men are allowed to have more than one, and once upon a time they were allowed to have more than one.
Sure.
And I think that the reason that they only became monogamous was because the Christians hated the idea of them having more than one.
Sure. Yeah, because they're Europeanized or something, I guess.
Well, I mean, the Mormons were persecuted because of their polygamy, because, the monogamous Americans thought, well, if we allow them to, do their polygamy thing, they'll outnumber us, and they'll outbreed us, and in the end we'll be the minorities, and we won't get any women at all.
That's interesting.
I'm just assuming that's how they thought, because they were persecuted right across America, from the eastern seaboard to the western seaboard.
Right. Okay. So the point there is that at first sight we think sex, the act of sex, is harmless, or what's it? The act of free sex or sex outside marriage is harmless, but there are endless harms, including children becoming more likely to be criminals, etc. Daddy issues, but on both sides, by the way. Girls having daddy issues, meaning they don't select men very well to marry, and boys have daddy issues, so they don't have the boundaries, so they become more likely to be criminals. So
or not even successful criminals, because they can't work with each other because they don't understand how male hierarchy works. So they have problems with authority. And think that the way to assert their masculinity is to defy it.
Interesting. Yeah.
But somebody growing up in a big family with dad, I think instinctively we sort of know, if you grow up in a nuclear family, that mum is a court of appeal, against elder brother or sister, but dad is the final court of appeal. And then, according to how old your siblings are, there's a kind of natural authority.
That's
how
right,
older than you, so you better listen to it. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And there is something about not being an only child. You do develop more social skills and things. So, which is another thing. Like if you have stable families, first of all you have to believe in marriage, so you can have stable families, so you can have lots of children, so you can develop better, I think. So there's so many things that just people can't fully understand. Like for example, Islam promotes women being housewives or working outside the home, and men going out and making money. And people go, why can't we all be equal and be treated exactly the same? It turns out a lot of women don't really like working. Men actually enjoy working. We like to get up. That's why men have sheds and they just end up doing something even in their spare time, right? And more people complain about the gender wage cap, but that's actually just evidence that men are better suited to make money. It doesn't make them better human beings, because women are better suited at taking care of little things that are more likely to die, you know what I mean? And they take care of the little things, they're more caring. Like my wife has a better relationship with the kids, like a loving sort of relationship than I do,
I mean, women's work is important. I mean, because you soon realise that a lot of things can't be done if you haven't got a supportive wife.
Yeah.
To look after your home or make you think it's worth, working hard.
Yeah. there's so many. Sorry. There's so many things that it's really hard to point out, but like the point I was going to make about women staying at home and men working, which is a very religious kind of point of view, is that they found out that there's a thing called, or the studies, they realised something called a 2-income trap. Have you ever heard of something like that? So,
I'm not quite sure
but basically,
it is a trap.
well, what happens is if both men and women go out, they're going to have overheads if they have children. You want them to have children, keep the population going. And a lot of the women's low wage is used up in child minding, and you might say, oh, that's fine, even if they make overall more money. But what happens is the children don't get picked up as much. They've done another study on that, right? You're not going to be taken care of by strangers as well as you're going to be taken care of by your mum.
Yeah.
So they're endless. So basically what happened, and there's also some other things, more complex things, the benefits of only one person working. It kind of gives leeway for when you have 2 income, living on 2 incomes, you become, I can't remember what the argument was exactly, but you get used to 2 incomes and then you become dependent on 2 incomes. So if one person
stops working,
you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
But somehow that's maybe I think what happens is the wife can be a backup possibly in the short term to keep things going if dad, the husband, loses his job. The point is, just to kind of summarize, there's so many psychological studies that keep supporting religious laws. I think Martin Luther King put it in an interesting way. He said, until the laws of man and the laws of God are at one, we're at peace, there won't be peace, something like that. I don't know, do you remember that, any phrase like that?
I don't remember, but it seems to me that the whole point of all the religions that we have heard of, even if if they're not as effective as Islam, is the idea of making people marry and have children in their 20s, because if you don't kind of force them to do it by social pressure, then people will get other ideas and then in the end refuse to do it.
Yeah.
So that's a reason, and obviously, if you don't have families, you can't pass on any tradition. I mean, what traditions do we have if we don't have a religion? It would be the tradition of, well, I don't know, shopping, football, watching movies, binge watching Netflix, and then it'll change in the next generation when we find different ways of amusing ourselves. So we don't, so we just become passive consumers of culture that is given to us, with floating around and just accepting what we are given.
Yeah, totally true. When you don't have black and white rules, they get watered down over time, and they just become materialism because that's the default. It's easier to go downhill than uphill. The uphill struggle is to create principles and have principles that stick by. The downhill thing is have no principles and let the advertisers tell you what you believe, because that's what's going to happen. You keep hearing adverts to tell you buy more rubbish that you don't need, and you will, because there are no clear rules.
Yeah, and also I think really it will be about sex and shopping. The religion is sex and shopping, or even sex and drugs and rock and roll. It is about pleasure, and therefore it is short-term pleasure. And people who value short-term pleasure will always do worse than people who value prudence and savings and impulse control, and change the character of your entire nation when you change their belief system.
And one other thing that I think is really interesting, as you go away from God, as society becomes more separated.
Yes, atomized, and I think I forget which sociologist Max Weber, I think he talked about atomization and anomy, which means people not really knowing what the meaning, what they're for, and I think religion kind of lowers our expectations by giving us this onerous burden of marriage. It's sort of, you won't wonder what your life is about when you have a job and you're supposed to, earn money and keep the family going and looking after the children. You won't be, sitting around wondering whether you're, having as much fun as, somebody else on social media. You would be too busy, getting on with your life and doing the things that need to be done.
And enjoying that process. It's not just an arduous task of taking care of the children, although nowadays people see it that way because they don't see the long-term vision behind a family, which is, raising good people, making a better society. They will take care of you when you're older, and all these beautiful things, having grandchildren,
And also, I think even not counting, having children or whatever. I mean, it could be just in a long-term relationship with no children. The fact that you are in a long-term relationship with somebody will mean that the important milestones of your life will be remembered by the other person, and they'll know, such and such happened to you, and this and that happened to you, and together you did this, or and went on holiday, or and they remind you. It's like, at this important moment in your life, I was there, and so you have a firmer sense of your identity, but if you never really had people who stayed with you through your life, such as a brother or a sister might, you won't, all these important events in your life are just not remembered or not shared.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it's nice to share the journey of life with people, and you feel really lonely.
Remember when we,
Yeah, like if I got my Google Photos and I share it with my wife, and oh, that happened. And it's really nice. Like, you know what I mean? Seeing the kids grow up and all that kind of stuff.
So it's all about, if we're in a community, we can say, I remember, you did this and I did that, and we quarrelled and then we made up, and, blah blah. And
we had struggles, which is also part of it. Yeah. And so, kind of bringing it back to Islam, we've said that generally religion works. But why Islam out? Why did he call it secular Koranism? Why not secular Torahism or that sounds weird? Torahism, I should say, or secular Bibleism or something like that. Why Koranism? Why Islam? We did a video essentially about this last week, which is why Islam's the best. But we might as well kind of round it off like that. Like let's compare some of the teachings. A funny one I would like to compare is eating pork. So the Jews actually agree with us, and the Christians at some point used to. Did they ever not eat pork? But the Bible says not to eat pork. So they just don't follow their own book.
Well, they obviously changed their religion over the centuries, because once upon a time, the only Christians were Jews who thought Jesus was the Messiah.
There's no such thing as Christianity,
and then Paul thought, well, I'm not going to be able to sell it to Jews because they'll be, thinking it's idolatry to worship a man, so I can sell it to the Gentiles who won't have this protection. This prohibition to tell them not to do it.
Yeah.
So I guess he just sold it to the Gentiles, and obviously the Gentiles were saying, well, do we have to get ourselves circumcised? And can
so
we walk? And
slippery slope to basically not following anything, Yeah. So for people who don't know, Jesus didn't start a religion called Christianity. In fact, he refused to talk to non-Christians. It's quite the opposite, The Bible is full of that kind of thing. Only come for the 12 tribes of Israel, and supposedly called non-Jews of dogs, and I'm not going to talk to you, and all this kind of stuff, So, why did I pick that point up? Because some people go, I don't want to follow Islam. They stop me from pork. I think there's a recent comment on the video or something, maybe our last video, and it's like, well, first of all, pork is bad for you. just like I said in the beginning of the video, like Islam doesn't make, or God doesn't make random laws. It just makes laws that are good for you. It's up to you if you want to follow them. So and you might say, well, how is it bad for you? Because it's quite scientific, and God, the creator, kind of knew all this stuff. Did you know that pigs have short digestive systems, so that the toxins remain in their blood, all the crap that they eat remains in their, not their blood, but in their flesh. So you eat that,
and the parasites might,
right,
burrow through your brain, apparently, if you don't cook the meat enough.
Yes.
So, and I guess in the olden days, the temptation to, think, oh, I'm hungry now. It's not quite cooked, but never mind. But obviously now we have, timers in our kitchen and
but who knows who's doing it? If you're in a rush, you might do it wrong, for example, right? So the point is that some things, not everything should be eaten. We already know that. And so God is just saying, oh, that animal, bad for you. Like, you don't have to complain about it if God's trying to help you. Take the help, So anyway, if you're choosing between the religions, let's say we're talking about pork, it's forbidden in the Bible, and you've got Christians who don't follow it. Then you've got the Buddhists who don't have, I don't think they've got any rule on it. Let's just say they don't have a rule, at least from the Western version of Buddhism. And the Western version of Buddhism is very, very different to real Buddhism. Just for people's kind of reference, there's a website called Real Buddhist Quotes. Do check that out, and you'll see how different they are to the so-called Buddhist quotes. But the fake Western Buddhist quotes roll off the tongue. They're really short and easy to understand. Buddha was very complicated. Yeah. So just be aware that most of what you think is Buddhism isn't really Buddhism. But let's talk about Western Buddhism versus Christianity versus Hinduism versus Islam and Judaism. The problem with Buddhism is that it doesn't work because it's just kind of another form of Western Buddhism. It's just jumping on a bandwagon of liberalism. It's like, oh, you don't have to do anything, just stay away from people, sort of thing. Like, it's kind of like, it doesn't encourage you to be a functioning part of society. It says, like, connection is bad, doesn't it? It says connection is suffering, relationships are suffering. That's actually the opposite of human nature.
Well, yes, I mean, if it seems to me that Buddhism is saying, just make yourself dead so you don't desire anything, because desire is suffering. Yeah. And if it's saying that the highest status Buddhists are the monks who live, in their monasteries, you're
disconnected.
So you're not being practical, but okay, you can look at the list of, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and it's like, even if you memorize these words, they're actually quite hard to apply. Like, what are you supposed to do with, right thought, right speech, right action?
Vague.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And others like that, and basically people just sort of need simple rules like do this and don't do that.
Yeah. So when you have a really good self-help book, it tells you exactly what to do, more as precise as possible, isn't it? That's what you want. You don't want a vague book that just tells you, you'll be fine, do whatever you want. That would be a pointless book, isn't it? Like,
as long as you're well-intentioned. It's like, well, what does even that
that
mean?
book would not sell, would it, if it was made by a human author? If it just said, like you say, have good intentions or something weird, vague like that. So that's Buddhism. It really doesn't work, and statistically it doesn't work. What I mean by that is, if you look at the growth or the populations of the different religions, you can see Islam is growing the fastest, and Buddhism, the numbers are actually negative by 2050 or something. Like they're lower than being an atheist. It's worse than being an atheist. We've already said being an atheist is bad, right? It's being an atheist makes you. Maybe we haven't really covered atheism.
Well, I mean, it has been said that Buddhism is an atheist philosophy, right? I mean, that's what that's how I understood it.
But let me point out that actual real Buddhism they believe in God. Yeah, I've even had I used to do live streams with a Buddhist monk. He even said that. But you can go back through their history. They believe in God. Trust me. If you doubt that, I'll give you references.
Okay, I'll certainly look up that video. But it's actually a logical inference because we know that Buddhists believe in reincarnation, like Hindus do. It's like, well, who's in charge of reincarnation? There must be somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Who's deciding to become a dog or a worm or whatever, or get to nirvana? So that makes sense. And I probably should point out that as a Muslim, particularly an Ahmadi Muslim, which is like the rejuvenation of real Islam, we believe as Buddha as being a prophet, but the ideas have got lost and confused over time, and because they've gone past their sell-by date, then they're supposed to be a regional tribal faith, okay, that had is done its purpose. It wasn't supposed to survive until now. And so the idea, for example, reincarnation of you do like a constant a life and death cycle, that's actually a common idea in all the religions. So, for example, Christians have rebirth, born again Christians. Okay, in Islam, you're constantly going through deaths of your ego. So those ideas just got confused and become literal into fantastic ideas and stories. Do you know what I mean? But lost any value because it's a stupid idea. You know what I mean? But if you remember or realise that to grow, you must constantly let go of your bad ideas, which is really painful to our ego. Because we, for example, we might sacrifice everything to buy an expensive car. And if people don't, if we feel that we're going to sacrifice having that expensive car, that's actually really painful for a lot of people, But when you let go of that, you become really free. Because then you can actually do things you actually want to do, like maybe go to interesting places around the world and learn things, for example, from different cultures. So, just to clarify, I don't disbelieve in all the religions. I just believe they've been corrupted from their sources, which kind of makes more sense.
Yes, it
makes more sense in the sense that why would God ignore all of humanity until Islam, for example, turned up? No, Islam teaches that God always took care of all of humanity. The Quran teaches for every time and every place we sent prophets. I can't remember the exact words, but essentially that. So, I mean, Dean, are you vaguely aware of a verse like that?
Sent prophets
I've been sent
around the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I'm saying really, we could actually use our reason to work out which is best.
Yeah.
There are only 5 world religions. There's no point,
and we could use the population levels to have a metric. Like if as at a, let's say, evolutionary level, it's good to have more children, right? And so if Islam
empire is an objective measure.
Another measure, but also if we're maybe we can't see Islamic empires at the moment, right? But empire is a bit more confusing. Like, what's an empire? We don't have too many empires, or they're all hidden empires. Like the British Empire is more like an economic empire at the moment, like economic imperialism, right? So it's not obvious. They don't have their colony. The colonies are no longer their direct colonies, but they're still abusing them, right? Yeah. But it's not obvious. But if you look at population, it's easier to look. You've got Pew Research, and if you search, population levels or predicted population levels of different religions, Islam's growing by far the fastest, and at an evolutionary level, that's a good thing. And if you look at Buddhism, they go minus, whatever that means, So they're even worse than pure atheism, which is a nihilistic process.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, atheism, which we haven't really touched on, but we have actually. We said atheism is essentially liberalism, do whatever you want, and that doesn't work. they've tried and tested it over the decades, and it keeps failing. And even at a psychological level, it doesn't work, because if you don't believe in God, then
you will
logically
cheat. You will cheat with all the rules. It's sort of like, well, nobody's looking. I think I'll get away with murder.
Yeah,
or
you get away with
robbery,
whatever
or
you can.
rape, or
But
whatever.
also, it's a very depressing outlook. It's a nihilistic outlook. Some atheists try to claim that you can create your own purpose. But if you know there is no actual purpose to life, and you're creating temporary purposes, you know you're just trying to trick yourself. And nobody really can trick themselves. Like you say, the purpose of my life is, secular Koranism will be successful. But deep down, it doesn't really matter. You'll be dead, and nobody will care after a few thousand years, or when all of humanity dies. It doesn't matter in the great scheme of things. But if it's God, if you're serving God, and there's an infinite journey towards God, then it means something beyond life.
Yeah, I mean, the most you can do, even if you don't believe in God, is you say what you believe to be true. And if you're too scared to say that because you're afraid of your government, then you're not even having that integrity.
Yeah.
You are actually, behaving like cattle because you have no principles. You're not going to, argue about something because you don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting point, that people, when you're religious, people know, if you watch, I don't know, watch
That you
religious.
have principles.
Yeah, and you're really strong-willed. You're willing to die for your principles, even though it sounds terrible, right? But on the other end, I think another really interesting point is that we've talked about the decline of testosterone levels, right? And I think it's related to men becoming more feminine, because they don't stand for anything. Men used to be the safeguarders of principles, like this is what is, let's just
and I
stood for
think
something,
True masculinity means men having principles. It's not having a six-pack and muscles and being good looking. It means that you do have principles, and I think now it actually affects women, because the principle of being a man. You were talking about dying for your principles. It's sort of like, well, if you're a bloke and your country is under attack, you have to go and defend your territory with your life. And if you don't come back, too bad. But that's what you're supposed to do.
But you stood for it.
You're not going to send your women to go and fight. And this is what they're doing in Ukraine. They're sending women
Seriously
to die.
I thought the women
front
were
line.
escaping and running away from Ukraine.
Well, I mean, there are a few, glamour pics on CNN, showing, a good-looking woman surrounded by good-looking guys, and maybe it's, trying to get women who think it might be fun to be surrounded.
I mean, that's not really going to work. You can
I don't
see
know, but if they
working.
believe it and if they go, they're going to get themselves killed for nothing, right?
They're going to get everybody else killed as well.
Yeah, because
they'll probably shoot shoot everybody around. But that's realistic. I'm not just joking. I mean, we can imagine. I wouldn't want a woman with a gun. That's not being sexist. It's just being realistic. It's just stupid. And that's the thing. We've kind of accepted, but me joking that that's what a woman would do: kill all of her comrades, or so.
Well, the thing is, if you have to send your women into war, you have lost the war. Don't get them killed over nothing. You have lost the war. I mean, if you find yourself thinking, I have to send my elderly, men not of fighting age, then you have already lost, and you're just getting them killed over nothing. You might just want to surrender. If you value their lives, which clearly you don't, if you're just shoving them into the front line and getting themselves killed over nothing.
So I suppose to bring that back to what we're talking about, is Islam is a very sexist religion, and I'm proud of it. Sexist in the sense that it says this gender's role is this other gender's role is that. Men should defend women, protect the family, all that kind of stuff. And it works, and women like that. It's practical, even at like a sexual level. Women like men that protect them. Even the act of sex is an act of submission. That's how it works. On the women's part, and all this kind of stuff, right? So that's
and this division of labour. which
Yeah.
is actually makes a society more efficient, and
Yes.
it's actually a liberal principle.
Yeah.
You know, it's about free trade, specialization, division of labor to make your factory more effective.
Right.
So the people good at doing one thing, just do what they're good at,
Right.
and then they put together a product, and so
Exactly. So this is division of labor.
McDonald's.
Yeah.
McDonald's is basically, the best illustration of this principle, because
Yeah.
that there would be short order cooks in America. He'd just do everything,
Yes.
and then he'd get angry, and then he'd quit, and,
Yeah.
and the employees wouldn't know what to do. But then he thought, we're going to get ridiculously easy jobs that individual teenagers
Yeah.
who are completely unskilled can do, and then
Yeah.
he can put them together, and
Yeah.
then we'll have McDonald's.
Yeah, and they're the most successful fast food chain there is. Everywhere I go, until recently, because they're being, in the Middle East where I live, nobody's going there anymore because they support Israel. But generally speaking, they were until the latest, genocide, very successful even in the Middle East. And yeah, division of labor makes sense at an economic level, and we know men are just more industrious, and there's a psychological reason for that. I understand from psychologists that men like things, women like people, are more focused on people, they're more focused on relationships, and which says a lot for women actually in a good way, right? And so men are just like, that's why they're more addicted to computer games and things, so they're more focused on that kind of thing. And then by being focused on technology, what they do is they basically are better industrialists. So if, for example, it's mainly men who are into things like programming, they're more into STEM, right? So if you're a better programmer, then what you do is you make an app that does the job of millions of people, and then you just make life easier for everybody by being more efficient. You know what I mean? But life is not just about efficiency, it's about love and kindness, and that's when women take over.
Yeah.
And it has very important value,
Yeah, and I just want to make another point about something I remembered from economics about specialization. So they were giving the example of there's a professor, he can do his gardening, and there's this gardener, he can do the gardening better. But if you make the professor do the gardening as well, he's wasting his time doing badly what the gardener could have done, and not using his time thinking of new ideas, inventing stuff or whatever. So there is this opportunity cost. And
and he won't enjoy it. He won't enjoy it like the gardener who knows his trade and really enjoys everything he does with detail, doesn't it?
And I think it might be an idea for Muslims to think, that there are a lot of liberal ideas that are actually within the framework of Islamic thought.
That's a good point. Like, I was talking the other week with other people, like, Islam doesn't reject capitalism. Well,
I think capitalism is not possible without usury. So
okay, depends on your definition of capitalism.
But commerce is something that I think.
Commerce or trade, right?
Yeah,
so it's not against free trade. I'm not going to get into the word of capitalism then, because people, like, if you go to the dictionary definition, it doesn't talk about interest. It just talks about
maybe fractional reserve.
But that's yeah. So people have got, like, I would say, confused ideas about what capitalism is, because you can't just keep adding to the definition. So the dictionary definition I've checked is only the right to have private property, which is very basic. If you have private property, therefore you can trade it and things like that. So Islam's not against that. It just has social rules that can control that. So you shouldn't do prostitution and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And other things that other people. Bringing back why we need Islam so desperately, people don't understand why lending on interest is so dangerous. That's been forbidden.
It causes inflation and causes boom bust cycles.
Right, exactly. It causes inflation. It enables wars. Wars cannot be done
without war finance.
Yeah.
Which is usury.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do it properly, you're going to get inflation, and then your own people will rise up against you because they hate paying the cost of your imperial war, like they did in the French Revolution.
Right.
Because the King of France was sponsoring the American Revolutionary Wars,
Yeah.
in order to to sabotage Britain.
Okay.
And in the end, they bankrupted themselves,
Yeah.
and then they had the French
Right.
Revolution.
Yeah, people don't realise these bombs are like billions and billions. You keep hearing it on the news. Like, where are these billions coming from? From thin air, quite frankly. Printed money based on fractional reserve lending, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And it becomes a behavioural addiction, because if you know that you can just shake the money tree every time you're feeling like you want a bit more money for your schemes, projects, you'll keep doing it until.
And then this other obvious effect is you destroy the world in the process because you're able to do it. So that's a very interesting video. We covered a ton of things. Hopefully people are interested in the world and making themselves happier and things like that will benefit from this video. Thank you very much.
I hope so. I hope somebody listens and acts on a few ideas.
I'm sure these videos get a lot less views, but they're more valuable than a lot of my videos that get thousands, quite frankly. So I'm quite pleased with a few people. As the Quran teaches, if you save the life of one person, it's like saving all of humanity. It's a biblical teaching as well. And that's enough for me. Change one person's life, perfect. Getting thousands of views and nobody actually changing their lives or benefiting from it doesn't benefit me at all. Thank you very much, Claire. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your questions.